Welcome back to Tact Talks. I'm your host, Jack Brandwood, and this is the podcast where I speak to some of the brightest and most influential people in the tech industry in the UK. This week, I'm sitting down with the founder of Summize, Tom Dunlop. Our conversation ranges from their purpose, the positive starting with an angel investor, and having an entrepreneurial mindset.
There's no such thing as an entrepreneur, I think was the answer. Yeah, I was going deliberately provocative, yeah. I think people can have an entrepreneurial mindset, and then whether they go on to become a founder is probably a slightly different conversation. You can be an entrepreneurial mindset, but still be an employee.
For more information on this episode and Tact Talks, head over to tact-it.co.uk. Thanks so much for listening and enjoy the episode. Hi, Tom. Thanks for coming on.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Another amazing day in Manchester. Yeah, not too sunny, but we're not used to it.
Grey skies, threat of rain. It's a standard Manchester day.
It really is. So look, for anyone who doesn't know who Tom, or don't know who doesn't know who Tom Dunlop is, could you run us through, who you are?
Of course. So I'm the founder and CEO at Summize. There you are.
Great, perfect. Straight to the point. Yeah. So I guess we'll go into Summize in a little while. But firstly, look, I always like to ask this question. Where did you grow up?
The fine town of Bury, which is a beautiful suburb of Manchester. So I'm Manchester born and bred and very much live in Manchester now.
Still near Bury, right?
Still near Bury, yeah, a place called Summize.
Lovely. Yeah, we get loads of fan mail now from everyone here.
The Summize community group is going strong.
It is. Obviously, you're a successful business owner now, and we'll go into that in a second. But again, when you were growing up in the beautiful town of Bury, which I know all too well, what were you like as a kid?
Extremely disobedient. No, my childhood was mainly around sport, if I'm honest. So I'd say I was quite disciplined because from an early age, probably from 9, 10, I was kind of really pushing on badminton as a kind of, I guess, career choice. So that was my sport. I played a number of sports, played football, played tennis. But badminton I played for England from about the age of 11. Wow. So it was kind of pretty full on traveling kind of to different countries from kind of 11, 12, and then consistently throughout kind of my childhood. So it was good because it meant that I didn't, get involved in the darker side of Bury. So it was good because I didn't, it kept me kind of quite disciplined throughout school. It meant that outside of school, I just trained basically like every night. And to be honest, my life was all being planned around going to the Olympics. That was the plan. To the point where when I got to sort of university age and going through college, I was the European champion in my head. But at that stage, it was kind of, well, which university do I go to, which would allow me to go to the Olympics? And can I continue to go and do my degree at the same time as be essentially a full-time player? And I actually applied for a lot of sport and exercise science courses just because I felt like, well, I must have to go into sport because that's my life really as a kid. And I just applied for one law and psychology course on a whim really because I did it at college and I thought I actually quite enjoy it. And it's only really towards when I was getting my results that I actually decided kind of last minute to switch to sort of law as a sort of, I guess, a backup to the kind of badminton career. I quite liked the mental challenge. I think when you're sort of an athlete or all you can think about is sport, you're so physically demanding, like your time is all about physical demanding. I think law allowed me to kind of have that mental like way of, I guess, outlet where I could actually challenge myself mentally. And I really enjoyed that, solving problems, thinking about the legal side, its application to business, to consumers, whatever it might be. And that's what led me to kind of apply for the role and ultimately got on that route in university. So yeah, it was a good, happy childhood, but very sport focused. So very disciplined, I think, as a kid, if I'm honest.
And then when did the badminton dream go?
Oh, it's still there.
I'm
still hoping.
Oh no.
No, it's. I'd say when I finished university, I basically had to make a choice as well. Do I commit to law or do I commit to going down the badminton route? Wow. So kind of the GB program was kind of, I have to move to Milton Keynes, be at the National Badminton Centre. You go from being a junior where you fly around the world as Team England, which was amazing as a kid, to actually this would be a salary essentially, which is non-existent as you can imagine in badminton. You're kind of on your own, you're kind of representing yourself, you're flying your own, there's that team feel kind of goes a bit. And I had to kind of make that life choice. And I think at the time I'd fell out of love a little bit. I was kind of a full-time professional alongside doing my law degree. And it was that conversation with GB that was like, actually, no, I want to go to law school and almost take a back seat for badminton and kind of sacrifice my Olympic dream. I think I was a realist as well. I think I didn't I wasn't going to win Olympic gold. I was not as good as, the best, certainly from like China and like the Koreans, people like that they were just the streets ahead, if I'm honest. So I think when I realized that it was probably very unrealistic, I needed to shift focus and kind of go into law. So it was the end of university, kind of law school time.
Fair play. But it must have been quite a dark time almost. But again, it doesn't sound like it because you were kind of like, this is.
Yeah, I always think as a kid I used each one of them as an excuse. Like, so if I had a really bad tournament or I didn't win, I'd be like, yeah, but I've got my law degree or I'm doing law, so I'll be a lawyer. But then if I wasn't enjoying that, I'd be like, yeah, but I'm going to be an Olympian. So, and I think when I stopped badminton, at the time in law school, I actually started up kind of my first sort of online business in a way, or I kind of, I needed something else. It felt like I couldn't just do the law school. That didn't feel like enough, weirdly. So at the time I started up a comparison site for solicitors whilst I was in law school. And that kind of transitioned me from worrying about not competing, worrying about not having kind of that side hustle almost, to actually having something else to interest me, which was like a business, an online kind of tech business, really. I mean, it failed, but it was the distraction that was the key to kind of allow me to really focus on, I guess, law and legal as a route.
I mean, up until Summize, I assume, has that been a pattern throughout your career? Like you've always been looking for something else to
I think so.
Yeah.
I think I've always tried to get the balance right between, and that's where it became harder because my side hustle essentially were both, my day job was mentally demanding.
Sure.
And then my sort of side hustle was also mentally demanding. So I think I found that balance can be quite hard. I think before it was always good because I had the mental demands, but then I could have my outlet of physical training, and I think they complemented each other very well. And I've got to admit, when I went into working as a lawyer, working in a law firm, I lost that sort of, not motivation to do something outside, but I got busy with work. I think I just stopped personally developing myself. I think I was just kind of, I need to do this. I'm a trainee lawyer, and then I'm a newly qualified lawyer. I didn't really think about what do I actually want to do. I just kind of was on the track. And I think that's very easy for so many people in law to just get stuck on the track and not necessarily, same with most professions, without really thinking about yourself. Like, what do you actually want? Can you do anything that will help you get to that kind of end goal quicker? And I think I probably went through a period of losing that for a few years where I just got busy before I then got back on track.
So what was and I've heard this before from when we had Rich, obviously, on the podcast. It was fantastic. From your perspective, what was the journey to Summize, going from just an idea perhaps to an actual business?
I think there's a number of things that contributed to it. So first was where I kind of reignited my own personal kind of interest. And I kind of talk a lot about having an entrepreneurial mindset. You don't necessarily have to be a founder of a business, but I think you can have a mindset that lends itself to thinking of these ideas. Because everyone says, I could never think of ideas. I think when I went to AppSense, which is where I met Rich, was at that point, you're working in a really entrepreneurial environment. The founder, Charlie, who's now our chairman as well, he kind of had this infectious sort of entrepreneurial spirit and sort of that kind of eccentric entrepreneurial mind that would always think of the next big thing. And I think it rubs off on you, and you're working in that environment. And I felt like everyone that worked there sort of embraced that about their own profession. So they were always looking to do their own job better, or how can we automate something, or how can we make us more efficient? So I kind of got the spirit back. We were all listening to podcasts together like this. We're all like reading the same books, and we're all starting to get quite inspired by doing something else or starting our own business or whatever it might be. So I think because I was in that mindset, I was a lot more open to ideas. I was thinking of ideas more, whereas I probably a bit shut off from that before. And that's when I was going through the kind of DD process, as it were, we were being acquired, and I was reviewing the contracts. I immediately thought, this is crazy. Like, there's got to be a better way of doing it. Every other department had some form of system. Legal didn't. So it was kind of an obvious sort of idea, if I'm honest. I worked in the tech business, went to see Dave, who's my co-founder, and just basically said, look, like, this is what I'm thinking. He was the tech guy. Can you make it work? And he was like, yeah, I can. So we kind of traded ideas for a while. It was probably another year or two, really, before we actually started to develop a prototype, and I'd moved on to a couple of other different in-house roles. But in terms of the risk, I never felt it was a risk. if anything, I was sat there in a role that I really enjoyed and it was great, but I knew that I could go back and do that at any point if I really wanted to. So there wasn't any risk. It was just a case of at what point do I take the plunge, as it were, and kind of go full time, or at what point do we go for funding, which was always going to be the plan. And that ended up being about May 19-ish, about 3 years ago, that we got kind of pre-seed funding to allow us to develop the concept, and that allowed me to go full time. And at that point, it was like, well, if it doesn't work, I'm not going without a wage. And I think that's where a lot of people think you have to like sacrifice everything, like moonlight as long as you can. If you can do it on the side, do it on the side. I think certainly for a tech business, you can set up tech businesses now with the infrastructure from Microsoft and AWS quite quickly and easily. Right. And if you have the right people involved, you can get to the stage where you have a prototype like pretty quickly. And at that point, you can prove the concept. And then at that point, we went to get investment. So it never felt like a massively risky decision. And it felt quite natural just because of how, I guess, I was always thinking about new ideas. There was always the next big thing that I tried to think of. The weird thing about this one was I probably didn't put as much emphasis on it because it only affected me. It's like my problem.
Right.
And you always hear that that's the best ideas when you're solving your own problem. But I think when you're in your own world, you like, it feels quite unremarkable. You kind of start to think, well, contracts, like no one else cares about contracts, only me. But really double down on those type of ideas, and you'll probably find there's a load of stuff that you might think of in terms of new ideas that you can create a prototype from. So it never felt risky, really.
I think a lot of like serial entrepreneurs listen to this going, what does he mean? Like he's doing it all wrong. He's like, but that's a really interesting way to look at it, rather than the really dramatic, I'm quitting everything, I'm starting, this is it now, this is if it's all or nothing.
Yeah.
You actually can do it in a very much less risky way.
Yeah. I mean, I think that a lot of people think as well, they put so much emphasis on that first prototype.
Right.
When you listen to anyone who's actually been through the scale-up journey, exited, everyone talks about they pivoted about 3 times. Like what they started with as an idea was not what they ended up with. Right. It's never that linear. It's never the kind of, this is what, I mean, even think of the massive ones like Facebook. The first thing that came out was he wanted a dating app essentially for himself in his university. Like what you end up with is very rarely even close to what you start with. So if you can accept that, then I think then you don't put as much emphasis on that initial decision. You don't go, well, I have to make this thing work. It's iterative, and you know that what you start with is probably not what you're going to end up with. So it's all about at what point on that journey do you jump and go full time. And I think I made the choice that I wanted to get to a prototype of what, my version 1 of what I thought was the product, get some pre-seed, then jump, and then we'll work it out. At the end of the day, if we get the right people around the table, we'll make something happen. And I think that was the kind of attitude that I always had compared to, jump, take no salary. This is it. I found it, and this is going to be the idea.
Wow. Okay. On that, I mean, you actually a while back wrote an article on LinkedIn. Is it called an article? I think it is, isn't it? But
yeah. Wrote an article.
Yeah. Why not? A novel. You wrote something on LinkedIn, and it was a really, really good read. And I mean, the title was quite provocative. I mean, could you tell us what the title was?
There's no such thing as an entrepreneur, I think was the title. Yeah, I was going deliberately provocative. Yeah.
Yeah, it worked because I read it, and
nice.
But it was a great read.
Yeah.
So when you say there's no such thing as an entrepreneur, what were you actually getting at?
So I think what you hear a lot of people is people describe themselves as an entrepreneur. And I think what I found when I worked in very entrepreneurial environments was I worked with people who had all the traits of an entrepreneur, in that they were always thinking of new ideas. They were thinking of, like a friend of mine who I worked with had a black book of ideas. He must have had about 50 ideas for business ideas. Is he an entrepreneur or is he not? Like, and I think that was where I was struggling, was there's very different personalities with someone who can come up with an idea and then someone who actually founds a business. And actually, when you separate those two things, the skill sets are massively different. So for me to become a founder, I had to have an entrepreneurial mindset, which is very different than the skills it took to actually start a business up. So the whole point of the article was to kind of think, I've got many friends who have an entrepreneurial mindset, but are gainfully employed. They're a very good employee, and I think they make the best employees, actually. A lot of the staff at Summize, I would argue, have very entrepreneurial mindsets. They're always thinking about ways to do things. I bet if you asked every single employee, they have a business idea that they probably thought. One of the guys wants to create soulless shoes and things like that, on random ideas. But I think everyone has that mindset of thinking of better ways to do things, and that's just their personality type. whether they go on to become a founder is completely different. That takes, risk. It takes massive amounts of determination. It takes a huge amount of grit just to get over the number of rejections that you like to have. That's different than the sort of creative kind of thinking of new ways of doing things, maybe a little bit tech savvy if you want to get into tech. They're very different skill sets. And actually, when you get to a bigger company, you'll find that the people they bring in these senior positions are not entrepreneurs or entrepreneurial mindsets. They might be more akin to a founder personality compared to the original entrepreneur founder. So I think I think they're separate things. And that was the point of the article. So I don't think there's such thing as just an entrepreneur. I think people can have an entrepreneurial mindset, and then whether they go on to become a founder is probably a slightly different conversation. You can be an entrepreneurial mindset, but still be an employee.
Do you feel like the best companies are a mix of the two? Like you get one person who's perhaps entrepreneurial and the other person who's got that founder mindset?
Yeah, I think you have to have someone with that founder mindset. Ideally, all the founding team have that sort of grit, determination, because it's hard. It's a tough slog. I mean, anyone who's started a business, it's not easy. It feels like everything's burning down all the time. I mean, it's just constantly kind of understanding what the biggest risks are, prioritizing, and kind of really kind of not giving up and quitting and just carrying on with it. You've got to have that mentality in an early stage company. You had Rich on, having someone who has that mind to think of the future and think of how we can do things differently. You don't necessarily want to kind of try and confuse those two skill sets, because you want to leave those very creative people to think of the way forward, but you need the operators and the founders, that kind of grit, determination to really make it happen. So it's quite an interesting mix. I mean, you read books that say that, building a business is 10% the idea, 90% the execution. I think it's the same concept. You've got to detach the two and don't think that an entrepreneur is this kind of a natural thing that both you've got to have both. I think recognize which one you're stronger at.
That's interesting. So if you say you've got three people, one's a real creative, one's an entrepreneur, the entrepreneur mindset, one's got the founder mindset, rather than making that perhaps entrepreneur mindset kind of bleed into that founder mindset, no, just double down on what they're really good at, and that's being an entrepreneur. Hire someone else to do the founding sort of thing, and then if you've got a creative, don't make them try and be like all businessy and foundery. Just let them be creative. Just let them.
Most people say, do you need a founder, like a co-founder? And I think that when you look at most successful businesses, most had at least two people and someone plus a co-founder, maybe 3 or 4. And I think you find that dynamic works well, because there's usually sort of there's a balance between personalities there. Sure. And I just think that rather than always thinking that I am the entrepreneur, and it's very when you think about entrepreneurs, you think of like one person, and that one person being the catalyst that makes it all happen. I think you've got to think of it more of a rounded, more balanced view, and that's where those different personalities kind of really play off against each other.
So talking about Summize, then you mentioned there that you pivoted a couple of times when you started the business. So what was the original idea, and what is Summize now?
We're going to do socks. No, so the original idea, I mean, it was from the use case. We're going to summarize contracts, hence the name. So we started off with kind of signed contracts, PDFs that weren't searchable. How could we create a usable summary? So it's quite interesting about the way the idea came from was there's a company called Summize, which was summarized news articles. And I was really fascinated by the story. It's a 17-year-old kind of man, I don't know, who came up with this concept to summarize the news articles, had these really high-profile investors, and he sold it to Yahoo, and it was this kind of like within about a year of coming up with the idea, hadn't really monetized it, sold for 30 million. And I was just enthralled by the story of this, and I had this kind of, when I heard about this story, I then started to do the DD, and I'm like, summaries of news articles, what about summaries of contracts? So it's sort of taking that concept a little bit and running with it. But I think when you find that was my use case at that time, and I think when I started to go to market, started to sell it, some people had the same use case, but you soon realize, well, that's for one-off projects. It's for very specific set of circumstances. So what we started to do was, how can we make this more relevant to everyone's day-to-day? Because for a SaaS product, you need to make sure that people are using it every day, you're getting kind of that engagement, and it's becoming part of the everyday process. And to do that, we needed to move what you argue is pre-signature. So we then started to look at how we can do the same reviews in Microsoft Word, so we could help you do the sort of, I guess, pre-signature review. And then it was only a matter of time before customers are coming to us and saying, well, you're basically a contract management system. but you just need these features, these features, these features. So we really resisted calling ourselves a CLM or contract management system for quite a while, until we built out this functionality that meant we could allow you to create contracts, review them, and then kind of store and manage them. So it was that full end-to-end kind of CLM. And that's what we are today, is very much end-to-end kind of digital contract solution that helps you create, review, and then just manage your contracts as well. And it's that full end-to-end. But we started off at the kind of post-signature bit.
When you first started, you mentioned seed funding there. And I know a lot of people listening to this will probably want to know about how did you go about getting seed funding? How does that work?
It's very hard, don't get me wrong, and I'd say that it's still very sort of network based. It's kind of a who you know will maybe provide a warm intro, and that can get you into places. So for me, I was a legal director at tech businesses, so I had an unfair advantage because I dealt with a lot of the investment side of those businesses. So I knew quite a few of the investment community, and it was an introduction from someone in the investment community to Maven. So Maven runs something called the Northern Powerhouse Investment Fund, which is a government-backed initiative. But basically, they've got a load of funds from the government to deploy in the north, particularly the northwest, to kind of stimulate jobs, if I'm honest. So it's not necessarily the same as going to a big VC that's kind of get X return, and you've got these institutional investors. Very different sort of type of fund. And we approached them. The person who is on our board, Jeremy, he was a lawyer before going into kind of working for Maven, so kind of got the product straight away. And I also had the help with the fact that Charlie, who was the founder of the company I previously worked at and quite a known entrepreneur in the area, was an angel investor. And so if you've got certain people involved with your business that have been there and done it before, it massively helps. And where everyone says get an angel investor first, I definitely recommend it. A lot of people say friends and family. If you can get it, great. But if you can really find someone who has a voice, has connections as well as the money, and that really, really early stage, it really, really does open up doors to then kind of follow on and make sure that you're planning not just that first bit of money. I think everyone thinks if someone just gave me 100 grand, I'd turn this into $1 billion business. It never works like that. You're always going to need more. So I think it's really understanding that from day one, and always planning who your investors are, what their network is before you even. It's really tempting not to do this, by the way, and we really, really nearly fell into that trap. But I think for us, we had Maven and Charlie from day one. They still support us today. And have been consistent in terms of our raises. So it's really set us up well from day one to get that kind of pre-seed funding. There's a lot of these angel trusts. There's a Manchester Angels network just come kind of opened up quite recently.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of, you can just Google it and find a lot of the angel investors or angel funds in the area and reach out. I think there's money to invest.
Before going to that stage, I guess you need a real strong concept of what your business is, right? You need a prototype, obviously, if it's a tech business.
Yeah.
Is there any other kind of like levers that you need to pull to make sure that you're in a position that you can actually really get a strong opportunity of getting the money in?
I think a lot rests on people.
Right.
I mean, you hear it a lot from VCs. They back the people. And I think that becomes certainly pre-seed, seed, a little bit Series A as well. A lot of it is about the people and the story. So for me, it was, I'm a commercial corporate lawyer. I've worked in in-house teams. I'm solving my problem. I've also worked in scaling tech businesses. My co-founder was an experienced software developer. Together, we can solve this problem. We had an angel investor who'd grown to and exited 2 big software businesses. You go to a VC with that and you talk about contracts, you understand the market into the minutiae detail where exactly how people do it today. Plus you've got a prototype, plus you've shown that you can sell it. So we did a POC for like £200 or something like that. We got someone to pay us £200 to do a POC basically. That validated that someone would pay money for your product. So if I knew that if I went to a kind of angel fund or whatever that had someone who was in my network that was a strong kind of our chairman, so a strong person who was an angel, a product that we'd shown we could sell, and people who knew the market like the back of the hand and the story that goes around that I stood a good chance of getting investment. And I think you've got to try and tick all those 3 boxes really when you go to these angels and try and the story in particular. Like I never realized how important not only just sales, but that ability to kind of tell the story is at that early stage. It's a lot about that and making sure they understand where you're at now, but ultimately where you want to go to. And you've got to really think about that.
And kind of on the story side of things as well. And we talked about an article you wrote a bit ago, but you also wrote another one more recent, which was Culture is Key. And part of that was around having like a strong purpose and a strong something we're all aiming towards. How do you come up with a purpose? And what is your purpose, for instance? What is Summize's purpose?
It's a good question in the sense of how do you come up with that. I think we didn't have one to start with as such. I think to start with, there's more. It's more important that you get the group of people that you assemble together who believe in your story about where you want to go. So we didn't necessarily have a specific purpose. Right now, it's that we want to make understanding and interacting with contracts better and simpler. It's just is anyone really passionate about that? Like, I don't know whether people get that passionate about that, but I think it's more about what we did quite early on, which was kind of, we still do now, is make sure that people understand their part in our journey. So my view was, look, contracts are extremely manual, make it relatable to that person. So for us, if you've ever ticked a box on booking a flight and it says agree to the terms and conditions, you go and try and cancel the flight and you have to pay the full price ticket, and you're left and think it's outrageous that you sign up to the terms and conditions. If you make it feel like, oh, well, I get that problem that you're trying to solve, if we could make that surface that information and summarize it so you're informed before you did anything, then they start to understand, I guess, why we exist. And then you understand the scale of the market, and you kind of understand then, we've worked in these businesses that exit for hundreds of millions, if not a billion. You kind of sat there and you've linked together the kind of purpose. It's kind of why we're here. Do you understand that? Can you relate to it? But then more important than that is, and you kind of joining us at this stage can play a huge part in this journey. Ideally, if you've done it before, that's incredible. And a lot of our management team, the reason we got these people in was because they've been there and done it. So you don't really need to give them the big sell on where we're going. They understand it. They've been there, done it. They understand the exciting journey we're about to go on. But I think that sort of setting making it relatable, why we're here, and then that person's role and feeling like they can contribute to the journey is massively important in the early days.
So surround yourself with the right people as well, right? It's going to be a massive part of obviously of culture, but your future as a business. Yeah. When you're hiring people, I mean, is there anything in particular that you look for when hiring somebody?
Right. So it's something I've thought a lot about recently about who do I sort of like relate to the most, or who I have a bias for, like, because you do when you're hiring, no matter how much you kind of try not to. And one thing I've learned is, as a founder, there's no one more passionate than you about the products or about the vision or about where you're going. And I think I've learned that anyone who tries to sort of match that passion about what you're doing, I automatically gravitate towards. And I think if they believe in it, they get passionate about the products, they really understand the use case, they're suggesting things that you maybe not have thought about, or even if you have, they're validating that they're thinking about it as well. I'm just drawn to those type of people. And I think at the start of the journey, having a load of people that have that passion and enthusiasm for what you're doing is massively essential. You almost want that kind of generalist who could turn the hand. You could probably put them in most positions in the business, and just because they have that raw passion for what you're doing, they'll just do it, and they'll do it the best of the ability. And I think you absolutely need to look out for those people at the start. Everyone says at different stages you need different people, and we found that as well. Like after we got a bit of traction and we got different functions, we actually hired an experienced management team quite early on, if I'm honest. So we got a CRO very early on. We got the kind of VP marketing. We had 2 tech senior leaders. But the reason we did that at the right stages was, once you get traction and once you're sort of thinking about scaling that up, it's so much easier if you've got someone who's been there and done it before.
Right.
Because prior to that, you're kind of figuring out as you go along. And I think a lot of startups do that for too long. The kind of relief I had that I didn't really need to think about sales. I mean, I obviously was involved in them, but someone just to come in and go, well, no, here's the playbook. I've been there and done it before. You need to put this is the structure. This is the kind of how we do things day to day. This is our ICP. This is how we should do pricing. Here's the commission plans. Let's go. I mean, the relief from my side to not have to think about those things was huge, but it's got to be the right time. I think we would never have put that person in place from day one. We just needed a bunch of people who were really passionate and would kind of really buy into the vision to drive, because it's almost like that. You've got to find people that have that sort of entrepreneurial sort of mindset, and probably maybe one day themselves will become founders. I think some people kind of don't look for that because they think it might be a bit disruptive or they're going to leave soon or whatever else. But I was almost looking for sort of like a bunch of mini entrepreneurs that will come and work and really help drive it to a point where we then get the sort of specialists in.
I mean, it kind of ties back to what you were saying before about almost like looking for these T-shaped people, like they can like you said, generalist, but then this one thing that we're really, really good at.
Yeah.
And I guess, like you said, if you've got your CRO in, your head of marketing, it allows you to be like, thank God, I can just focus on me, and making this and my entrepreneur mindset or founder mindset, and just focus on that one thing, and going 100% on it.
Yeah.
I think that's a really good bit of advice, because I think you're right. I think you see a lot of startups. Not a lot of startups have that really solid management team in at the beginning, right? It's never.
No, it's very rare. I mean, I think we found that going for, in terms of funding life cycles, certainly we go towards like the Series A side. A lot of the time that fund or the reason you're asking for funding is to then build out for the management team. And that's kind of the stage the company usually at. For us, because at the moment we're pre-Series A, but we've built that. So the money that will go out to look for investment will purely be fuel to really drive the company and scale. We don't have to have a 6-month period where we go to market, find the right management team, because I think then burn through a load of cash in the interim, don't quite hit the growth kind of journey we wanted to. So we made a deliberate choice to hire those positions early and get them in place, set up in this sort of test and learn phase, you could argue, the product market fit, to the point where we then go, now we're going to scale the company and really just double down. We don't have to then go and figure out how we set up these different areas.
And you're doing something right, because congratulations, you've been shortlisted for this isn't me telling you've been shortlisted, by the way. No, but yeah, you've been shortlisted for the Tech Northern. Can you help me out?
No, it's good to watch you do.
It's a mouthful.
It's Tech Entrepreneur of the Year for the prolific North World. So I think, they're great to celebrate. I think one thing having a software company in the North is you realize how few there is actually in the North. I think we do think of ourselves as a bit of a tech hub. I think Manchester in particular. But I say there's a lot of companies at the earlier sort of stage, and there's certainly a lot of tech-enabled services businesses where they're really services businesses, but they're kind of tech-enabled, which is good. They're great businesses, but I think when you start to kind of get involved in these awards and you see some of the other kind of companies that are there and that you're sat amongst, then I think it's obviously a massive compliment. It's great validation that you've reached a certain, I guess, milestone as a business as well, that you're getting recognized for sort of getting over that really horrible startup phase where everything breaks and you feel like you're on the right track. It's great validation that you are, and there's kind of external people saying, yeah, well done. This is like in recognition of it. So they're great moments to kind of stop, reflect a little bit, because I don't think people do that a lot when you're all, certainly I am, always thinking about what's next. Sure. I don't very rarely sit there and go, isn't it great that we've grown to this people or we've done whatever? I think it's more always about, well, it is, but I can now see the next 12 months and how exciting is that going to look? Sure. So I think awards some people don't like them. I think they're good for just having a pause and recognize that we have done something quite good so far.
Absolutely. And I mean, you mentioned there stopping and reflecting, but I want to kind of look into the next 12 months. What can people keep an eye out for with Summize, and what's going to be happening in the next 12 months? Anything that you can tell us?
Yeah, I think a lot is kind of what I described, which is we've got the kind of infrastructure, the management in place now, and I think we're on a quite exciting growth journey. So we're going to continue to scale what we've got. We're definitely looking at the US. So we are looking at maybe opening up an office in the US on the East Coast, probably early next year. And then, I mean, I guess as a fan, you always feel like you're raising money one way or another. So that's also probably part of our plans as well into the Series A. And just really continuing to scale. I think what I feel really good about the minute is we found our product market fit. We've done that scrappy phase. We've got a really, really good sweet spot in the market. We know we can just double down on. We've sold it enough times to some great brands. That means that we know how to implement it. We know where the product should go, and we don't feel like there's any huge gaps. So it's kind of one of those where, well, if that's the case, we need to double down and really scale what we've got. And I think that's what I'm excited about, is just scaling what we've got, but there will be an eye in the US as well.
Amazing. I've got 3 more questions and I'll let you go, I promise. The legal industry, you're obviously disrupting it, which is incredible. If there's one thing about the legal industry that you'd want to change, what would it be?
Oh, that's a good question. I think the legal industry is set up to be a very occasional use reactive industry. So it's a $1 trillion industry as it stands, the legal services market. which in some ways surprised me it's that big based on how lawyers interact with clients, and based on the fact that if you put yourself in your own shoes thinking, well, when would I go to a lawyer, it's got to be a pretty bad situation probably as to when you'd call your lawyer up. But the reality is that I think most SMEs and like globally would really welcome sort of more on-demand help, be more accessible, more subscription-based, the same way as you have an accountant that you might ring up for a query, or the HR advisory businesses that, is a great one in Manchester that is on the end of a phone if you just need that bit of advice. Like legal can do so much more to, I guess, monetize or make their knowledge, because ultimately that's what they are. It's knowledge about the law more available and accessible, rather than being kind of standoffish, I'll bill you by the hour type model. So I think that's for me, and we're trying to enable this with the product, is to make legal more accessible, more on demand, and just a general better service than what they're doing now, because they see themselves as being a last resort in a lot of instances. I think the legal services market could 10x in terms of size over the next 5 to 10 years if they do that.
I didn't realize it was $1 trillion market.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. A lot of market share to go at. Second question. You've worked with some amazing businesses. You are where you are now, and and we've touched on that. Is there anybody that you've crossed paths with in your career that has really left a lasting impression on you? Is there anyone that you'd be like, props?
I'd say there's a lot of people for different reasons, which is probably a very bad answer. But I think when it's not just from, I guess, work, as it were. So one thing I'm quite surprised about is how much I took from sport into the workplace is huge. And actually a big part of the culture at Summize has been from sport, actually. And I think when people think of other things other than just work, whether they've played sport, whether it was something more creative, like lessons that you learn along the way from them can be massively important to how you work. So I think that's one thing, is the sporting aspect has a huge impact, and there's loads of people from the kind of GB setup, other players, in terms of their commitment to the sport, like you learn from those. I think in terms of the business side, I mean, Charlie was someone, the reason why I wanted him as our sort of investor as well was because every interaction with Charlie felt like you were being inspired of some description. He was kind of talking about the next big thing, or you always felt like he's going to change the world, or he's going to do something. I think that sort of opened my eyes up, and it carried forward to Jim at Zuto, who's the CEO there. Very sort of similar in terms of always think about the next thing. And I think it's so infectious dealing with these type of people that you can't help but kind of let you rub off on your personality. And one of the people that I'd say was really valuable, who I've met before, was the CEO of Skyscanner. So he was called Mark Logan, but I had like a couple of chats with him, and it was all, he was very big on personal brand. And I think that's something that about how everyone needs to think about their personal brand as they're going through the workplace. What kind of 3 words will other people describe you as in the business? That's a big focus of Summize as well. But I think what I learned from that was a lot of people think about the business. A lot of people think about Summize as a vehicle. They don't really focus on the driver. And I think that what we're trying to do is understand how can we help each individual get to where they want to be, and what is their personal brand? What do they want to look like in the business? And we've really doubled down that from a culture perspective. But that was a huge impact on how I thought about things. Certainly thinking about being a leader in a business was, don't just preach about Summize and the story and the vision and just go on about how great Summize will be. Actually really put yourself into each employee's shoes, and how are they going to be a better person as a result of Summize? And I think that was a big impact on how I thought about things.
Incredible. Great answers. I think last question. Now, if you knew this was your last day on earth, and apart from spending time with family, of course, and being on this amazing podcast, obviously, what would you be doing? What would you be spending your last day doing?
Oh, that is a big question. That is a big question. I think the honest answer is, and I think you've kind of already said it, is because I've got 2 little girls. Yeah. I was when I met my wife, and she always says to me, like, the only thing I was obsessed about was being rich, and was like very shallow, and was very kind of, I was so motivated and determined to just be. I didn't really think about. I was very kind of self-centered. That's a bit critical, isn't it? But I very much focused on like me and where I would be, and I was driven to a goal. Certainly having my 2 girls, like you do, my kind of mindset completely shifted to make sure that it's all about them. And I think if I won, like, I would actually just not do I'd step completely back from anything that was outside of the family and just spend it with them. Go for a walk in the park. That's very wholesome, isn't it?
Very wholesome answer. Yeah, very wholesome answer. Okay. Well, look, thank you so much for coming on, Tom. Really do appreciate it. And obviously, it's been a long time coming. I've been really looking forward to you coming on. You haven't disappointed. I think whoever's watching this from, if they're setting up their own business, I think they'll take so much from it. Good luck with the awards, obviously. I hope you win. And excited to see where Summize is in the next 12 months.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
And that's it for this week's episode. Thanks so much for listening, and I really hope you enjoyed it. Anything we talked about will be linked in the show notes, and if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts. And we'll catch you on the next one.